Johnson & Johnson published promising new data for its booster shot. The company says it conducted studies on patients who had received the single-shot vaccine 6 to 8 months ago. It found that the booster shot produced a strong immune response after just one dose. This comes after Pfizer received official approval for a third booster shot. Meanwhile, the Biden administration reportedly received a classified report from the intelligence community about the origins of COVID, but the results were inconclusive. That's according to a story from the Washington Post, which cites 2 U.S. officials familiar with the matter. According to the Washington Post, the intelligence report could not determine if the virus was passed from animals to humans or if it escaped from a lab in China. NBC News has not confirmed the report. U.S. officials say the lack of information from China about the initial outbreak in Wuhan complicated the investigation. The Washington Post says portions of the intelligence report could be declassified and made public soon. This all comes as the U.S. continues to battle the rampant spread of the Delta variant. Florida alone has now topped 3 million COVID cases since the pandemic began, with unvaccinated patients maxing out ICU beds across the state. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez is outside a Tampa hospital where nurses are feeling the emotional toll of COVID.
Joe and Savannah, good morning. The CDC is now reporting that week over week, new COVID cases are up 12% and deaths are up 23%. And now the state of Florida has topped 3 million COVID cases since the pandemic began.
At St. Joseph's Hospital in Tampa, the pandemic is peaking daily.
This is not normal.
Nurse Jamie Lillo says just yesterday she brought 4 patients to the morgue.
I went home last night and I was mad. For sure. Because I don't need to be doing this right now. We could have avoided this whole wave if more people in our country had gone and just gotten 2 shots.
The Baycare Health System now has about 1,200 COVID patients, shattering its previous record of 700 last summer.
This is one of the COVID ICUs. There's 26 beds here, and right now 25 of them are full. The hospital has set up overflow beds in other parts of the facility.
The amount of deaths and dying that we're seeing is, in my whole nursing career, I've never seen anything like it.
Ambulances often have to wait here to drop off patients, or they're rerouted to other hospitals that are also stretched thin.
For example, if we're on critical care bypass, we're saying that we don't have beds or staff to provide care for critical care patients.
So now, essentially, you're diverting ambulances about half the time now because you just don't have the beds.
Exactly.
Across the country, new COVID cases are up about 12% over the previous week. Hospitalizations stayed about the same, but deaths are up 23%.
I think the only chance we have is vaccination, and that's it.
Among healthcare workers, the emotional toll is measured in long shifts and longer memories. Just this week, Jamie Lillo helped care for a fellow nurse who came down with COVID and did not survive.
It could be me. It could be any nurse. It could be anyone we know. And once you're in the bed in the ICU, you don't have any control anymore. I'm still here and I'm still trying, but I want to make people better. That's what I do, and I can't, and it's awful.
Joe and Savannah, a few months ago, I, along with many healthcare workers that we spoke with, would have doubted that it would have gotten this bad again. But here at this hospital, it's the worst it's ever been. Still, of course, across the country, it's not this bad everywhere. But for many healthcare workers here and in other places experiencing surges, this is incredibly frustrating. Joe and Savannah.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, thank you.
Now, while the country sees a spike in cases among the unvaccinated, some states are ramping up their fight against masks. Iowa is one of 8 states that banned mask mandates in schools. And while President Biden said he could pursue legal action against those states, Iowa's governor is doubling down. In a statement to NBC News, a spokesperson claimed that masks can have negative impacts and said in part, quote, "Parents know the health of their children best, which is why the governor supports parental choice over mandates." NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett joins us from Des Moines, Iowa. Maura, good morning. So students I know have just headed back to school there this week. What are the COVID cases like there, and what has the return to the classroom looked like, knowing that there's not a mask mandate?
Good morning, Savannah. Well, here in Des Moines, it's going to be a rainy first day back at school, but across the state, the COVID case rates that we've seen are coming back at levels that we haven't seen since the winter, and actually 13% of those new cases are among children under 17 years old, so a bulk of those that cannot be vaccinated. And so here in the state of Iowa, thousands of kids going back to school this week. One district in western Iowa already had to delay their first day of school because of a COVID outbreak. Here in Des Moines, the administration building was closed last week because 10% of staffers tested positive, so they're working remotely as kids go back. And so the Iowa State Education Association has warned districts across the state that they're going to need to start having those conversations about when they might close schools if COVID cases get worse across the state, Savannah.
And so what are school officials telling you about this mask debate?
It's a really tricky time to be an educator in states like Iowa right now. I spoke with the superintendent here in Des Moines, and he says that he just doesn't have the tools available to him to help keep his students safe. They can't enforce masks in school. A lot of their students, like the ones here at this elementary school, cannot be vaccinated. They don't even have a metric system within the school system to know about contact tracing or the numbers of kids that are being reported sick if they're getting COVID and what the level of the outbreak is there. And so he's really frustrated. I want to hear some of my conversation with the superintendent here.
Public health has been politicized. The COVID pandemic, I think, has been politicized. And it does feel like the arguments are less about what does science tell us is best practice in terms of keeping our communities safe and more about winning political victories.
Do you feel like the state has made your job harder?
Yes.
How does that feel?
It feels, it's frustrating, feels very isolating. And I'm conflicted on a daily basis.
Now, some parents in the Des Moines area are asking the superintendent to push back against the state, like we saw in Texas and Florida, and get creative with how they're enforcing masks. But the reality is here, Dr. Ahart just last academic year did push back against the state when it came to virtual schools. Ultimately, the state pushed back against him. He had to go to a hearing and ultimately lost points off of his educator's license. And so that puts him in a very tricky position. And that's why they're pushing recommendations around masks, pushing teachers wearing masks to encourage their students to do the right thing. But unfortunately, his hands are tied, Savannah.
All right, Maura Barrett, thank you so much. And thanks for being out there in the rain for us.
Let's bring in Dr. Bob Lahida. He's a professor at the Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine and the director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health. Dr. Lahida, always good to have you with us. I first want to get your reaction to that news that's breaking this morning from J&J on their booster shots. What are we learning from this information that J&J has put out there? And based on that, what would you tell patients who initially got that vaccine?
I would certainly, Joe, well, first of all, good morning, Joe. I would certainly tell patients to get out there and get a booster shot if they are immunosuppressed. This is the first thing, the first group of people, the elderly, the immunosuppressed, and those with severe comorbidities, because those are the ones that are going to die first when they get the COVID infection, even if they've been vaccinated, because this virus, this COVID Delta variant is very, very transmissible and very, very severe, as you've seen from your reports. So I think it's a great thing. Now we have the Pfizer booster, we have the Moderna booster, which is in the works, and now we have the J&J booster. So all three vaccines approved in the U.S. now have booster shots.
That is good news to hear. I want to return to Iowa, where Maura is reporting from, and to an argument we heard from the governor there. Her office said in part that, quote, long-term mask use can come with its own cost. Experts have raised concerns about the potential negative impact to students' social, behavioral, and speech development. So break down that argument for us. Is it right? Does it make any sense? Or would you push back against that argument from the governor there?
I would have to push back against that argument. It seems that the governor, from the reports that I've read, stating that the data confirming the use of masks, et cetera, are inconclusive. They are based in data from India. These are all the statements that have come out of the State House in Iowa. And I just think it's so dangerous now that, this this very volatile population of children below the age of 12 who cannot get vaccinated at this time are at significant risk. And the numbers of children that are dying from this virus are increasing by the day. So this is a very serious matter. And I think speech development and all can wait for the moment. I think we have to deal with the consequences of the ongoing infection, which can be quite lethal in schools. And there seems to be no guidance there with regard to wearing masks, not wearing masks. Parents certainly cannot make the decision at all times because they're not terribly informed. So it really behooves the leadership of a state to take charge and say, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to work, at least for a few months, to prevent the tremendous effects of the pandemic on young people in particular.
Let's pivot from states banning mask mandates to those areas that are mandating that we have vaccines. Philadelphia's Board of Education approved a vaccine mandate for all school employees. New York's governor, the new governor there, called for a mask or test requirement for all schools. Do you hope to see more of these orders, especially now that Pfizer has been given full approval?
Yes, I think Pfizer's approval with the FDA has opened the floodgate. I think mandates should be put into place for public health measures, especially, and I've said this all along, Joe, school teachers, ancillary help should be vaccinated so the transmission of the virus among young people in particular is totally thwarted. All right. And I think New York and Philadelphia have got the right idea.
All right. Dr. Bob Lahida, as always, thank you so much for helping us break down all this breaking news this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
Now to new developments overnight in Afghanistan, where Western forces have just days to complete their evacuation efforts and leave the country, likely abandoning thousands of Afghans.
That's after President Biden resisted international pressure to extend the August 31st deadline at yesterday's virtual G7 meeting.
We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. In addition, I've asked the Pentagon and the State Department for contingency plans to adjust the timetable, should that become necessary.
Let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Jeff Bennett and foreign correspondent Matt Bradley, who is in Ramstein, Germany. Jeff, let's start with you. Yesterday, G7 leaders tried to push the president to delay that deadline. Why did he refuse? And can the U.S. finish evacuations there by the end of the month?
Well, to the second part of your question, Joe, the White House and the Pentagon have said repeatedly they do believe that they can evacuate all remaining Americans from Afghanistan by President Biden's self-imposed August 31st deadline. But you're right. Yesterday, he made clear that he intends to stick by that deadline. He also said that he has requested contingency plans from the Pentagon and from the State Department if events on the ground mean that that timeline needs to shift a bit more. But as Savannah pointed out, it does appear now that there won't be enough time to evacuate all of the Afghan allies and all of those Afghans at risk, which brings with it another set of issues and contingencies. But President Biden was clear yesterday. In his view, the longer the U.S. remains on the ground there in Afghanistan, there are greater risks. Here's a bit more of what he had to say.
Every day we're on the ground is another day we know that ISIS-K is seeking to target the airport and attack both U.S. and allied forces and innocent civilians. Additionally, thus far, the Taliban have been taking steps to work with us so we can get our people out. But it's a tenuous situation.
And the White House maintains that the pace of evacuations is picking up. We just got some new numbers. They say in the last 24 hours, some 19,000 people have been airlifted out of that country. And then since August 14th, which is the day that those airlifts started, more than 80,000 people have been evacuated, Joe and Savannah.
All right, good to have those new numbers there, Jeff. So, Matt, this decision by the president could mean that thousands of Afghans hoping to flee the country will still miss out. You visited Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where many refugees are being flown to. What is the mood like over there? What was the reaction after this latest announcement?
Well, good morning, Joe and Savannah. Actually, Ramstein Air Base is behind me. It's a huge base, and we actually just saw a military transport plane land there. We don't know where they're from or if it even was filled with Afghan evacuees, but we were there yesterday. There are 7,500 Afghan evacuees now housed at this massive base. It's one of the largest in the world. 2,500 of them have already been processed and have been sent on to the States. But to say that this is a massive effort is an understatement. And actually, amidst all of the negative press that this has been getting, we spoke with some of the military personnel on this base, and they described the huge effort that went into this and how this effort has really increased their belief in their mission. Here's one of the head physicians at the base. His name is Simon Ritchie. He's a lieutenant colonel. Here's what he told me.
It's one of the proudest moments on active duty for me. There's no doubt about it. I've done what I consider some interesting, good work in the past. Very proud of that service, but this stands out, will always stand out to me because of the outsized impact it's going to have. We're seeing thousands and thousands of refugees come through, and to be able to provide some form of comfort to them to make their journey a little bit easier, it's incredibly meaningful.
So we also heard that there was a tent city that was built here in just a matter of 2 days, involving not just uniformed military members, but actually volunteers, their spouses, their children, all of them pitching in to build 323 tents in really just a matter of days. And that is what has set the stage for this huge effort. The main constraint here is not logistical, though. It's bureaucratic. But as you've seen, just as efforts to get people out of Kabul and get people onward from Doha to Al Udeid have picked up, they've picked up here, and in the last couple of days, we've seen more and more flights leaving as opposed to just arriving here. Joe, Savannah?
All right, Matt, Jeff, thank you so much for your reporting. Appreciate it.
Thousands of desperate people remain gathered at Kabul airport as the frantic evacuation effort continues ahead of next week's looming deadline. Sky News chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey is there and filed this report.
It's as bad as it gets now. Thousands upon thousands trapped. Behind them, the Taliban. In front, soldiers having to decide who stays and who goes. Nobody planned this. It's just how it is. The hours are counting down, and they know it. There are no good options left to them. Stick this out, try to get the family through and onto a flight, but risk failure. Or go home and await whatever may happen at the hands of their new masters. And hope it's not fatal. This is absolutely awful. Such is the desperation to be heard by the soldiers, the would-be evacuees are standing up to their knees in a sewage-filled canal. The stench is indescribable. Some have been here for days. Remember, the heat, the lack of water, the lack of food, and the conditions they're in are a cocktail just as lethal as any bullet. When they can identify people with the right papers to travel, they're pulled from the canal. It's a deep and sheer wall, the soldiers and the strongest stooping down to grab their families, often huge extended families, and out of the water. They emerge dripping wet but relieved. That nightmare is over. It still, however, doesn't mean it's about to get any easier. This is just the point where their right to travel will be considered. They can still be rejected. The numbers of tiny children enduring all this is heartbreaking. It must be so scary. It's noisy here. There are gunshots and shouting the whole time. What does this little boy think? Sat in his father's arms, protected from the sun by an umbrella, an occasional stroke to comfort him. That's all his dad can do, really, just comfort him.
Well, there's a real sense now that people are beginning to expect that this whole airlift is coming to an end, and they're really desperate. I mean, they're in a sewage canal. They're trying to show their paperwork, trying to show that they perhaps should be looked at. It's really desperate. That is actually the sort of pretty much hopeless column, we're told, but I can see all sorts of passports from different countries. The fact is that when the withdrawal happens, it's always going to be difficult because they can't keep working. The soldiers can't keep working up until the last minute. They have to start withdrawing in the days leading up to their departure. How they're going to deal with these people when that happens, we just don't know.
The Taliban are relieving the pressure on the process because they're stopping people coming now. Those aren't foreign special forces. That's the Taliban special forces, more heavily armed than others, and now slowly taking control of the Paras processing point. beyond the British lines, they direct the human traffic from above. There's no choice for the soldiers. This is the only way things can get done. And the soldiers are absolutely exhausted. Inside the walls of the compound, they grab a few hours rest. They aren't working shifts. These boys have done 2 days and nights in a row. They're absolutely wiped out. They'll be back on the barricades in a few minutes. They will never forget this strange, unexpected tour of duty.
A lot has happened in a short period of time. But people have sort of risen to the challenge, accepted what's been put in front of them, and we really focused on the importance of recovering the entitled personnel, doing their mission, and doing it for a good cause.
And of course, your soldiers are very young, a lot of them, right? This is not something they're probably ever expected to do.
No, I think that's a fair comment for many people at any age. Not many will have seen scenes such as this. But again, driven by that real sense of purpose, they've actually absolutely been committed to the task, and we'll see it through to the end.
And so this process goes on. It matters what is discussed and agreed thousands of miles away. But until someone says it's over, they'll keep trying and keep hoping. And that's all they have left. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Kabul.
Time to get a check on your morning news now weather.
Bill Cairns is here. Hey, Bill.
Hey, good morning, guys. So we got two things to talk about. One, the heat, which we talk about all summer long, and the pesky tropics. Looks like it could be an issue again in about 5-6 days from now. So let's first get into the heat numbers. This is the immediate impact. 60 million people under heat advisories right now. We go all the way from the deep south up through the middle of the country into the Great Lakes. Even areas from Buffalo to Syracuse and even the New York City area is now under heat advisory. So it was very hot and humid in the deep south yesterday, and that is now all the way northwards into Cincinnati. Even Chicago is going to feel pretty uncomfortable near 100 today. D.C. will feel like 100 degrees. You get the picture. Pretty much the same as yesterday, but spreading a little more into the northeast. On tomorrow, we'll call it 102 in Richmond. It'll feel like Little Rock 100, St. Louis 104. Once again, you get the idea. This weekend, a few lucky people will begin to cool off a little bit. Not so much in Detroit, but look at Syracuse, Portland, even New York City cools off. So at least the northeast will get a little bit of a break. Not so much for areas of the mid-Atlantic. And then the tropics. We have a tropical disturbance we're watching, a 70% chance of development. This one's going to head up towards Cancun by the time we get to like Friday night into Saturday. And then after that, guys, both of our long-range computer models take this system towards either Louisiana or Texas. So we'll watch that. That's not until Monday of next week, but that's not what we wanted to deal with already right after our last storm.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. See you in a bit.